The wind whistled low through the canyons that cut across the Arizona desert, carrying with it the smell of dust, smoke, and secrets long buried under red earth. The sun was sinking behind the ridges, staining the sky with the colors of blood and gold, when the Apache warrior reined in his horse and stared at the woman kneeling by the small fire. His shadow fell across her face, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The boy sat close to her, clutching a small wooden carving in his hand, the kind only Apache fathers made for their sons before they went off to war. The woman's eyes lifted, steady but tired. The Apache's voice came deep and cold, heavy with the question that had burned in him for years. "That boy, my son," he growled. The woman's lips trembled, but she didn't look away. Her voice was soft, like a whisper carried by the desert wind. "Do you think he carries your blood?" Silence hung between them, thick as the smoke rising from the fire. The question lingered in the air, stirring ghosts neither of them wanted to face. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried, and the sound stretched across the canyon like an old wound reopening. It had been 12 years since she'd last seen him. 12 long, bitter years since that night when the burning of her settlement lit up the horizon, and the screams of her people echoed through the valley. She'd been only a girl then, a settler's daughter with frightened eyes and too much faith in a world that was crumbling around her. And he had been wild and proud, his heart torn between his people's honor and a strange, forbidden tenderness for the woman he should have hated. Now, standing across from each other again, they looked older, hardened by what time had done. The woman's hands were rough, the marks of survival etched deep into her skin. The Apache's face carried the quiet strength of someone who had lost more than words could tell. The boy watched them both, confusion flickering in his eyes. He didn't understand why the man's voice carried such weight, or why his mother's hands shook as she reached for another log to feed the fire. He didn't know that the truth of his life, the truth of who he was, stood right there before him, cloaked in the silence of two people bound by a past they never escaped. The Apache dismounted slowly. His moccasins pressed into the sand as he stepped closer, his gaze flicking between the woman and the boy. The wind picked up again, rattling the dry brush, as if the desert itself held its breath. "You lied to me," he said at last. "You said the child did not live," she swallowed hard. "He almost didn't. The night they burned the outpost, I ran. The boy was barely breathing when I found shelter." Her eyes glistened with memories she tried to bury. "I told myself if you had known he lived, you would have come for him. And they would have killed you." The Apache's jaw clenched. "You think I feared death?" "I think you had a people to lead," she said quietly. "And I had a child to protect." Her words struck something deep inside him. He turned away, staring toward the horizon where the land stretched endless and unforgiving. He remembered that night too, the flames rising high, the sound of rifles, the chaos of war that left no room for mercy. He had searched for her body among the ashes, believing she was gone. Now she stood before him, and with her, a boy with dark hair and eyes that carried both their worlds. The boy looked from one to the other, his voice small. "Who are you?" The Apache's throat tightened. He wasn't sure how to answer. The words felt heavy in his mouth, like stones that had waited too long to be spoken. "A man who once made a promise," he said finally. The woman's eyes softened. She knew what he meant. Long before war and vengeance, long before the hatred between settlers and Apache tore them apart, there had been a promise whispered under the stars. A promise that love, however impossible, might bridge the gap between two worlds. But promises made in peace rarely survived the fires of war. The Apache stepped closer to the firelight. The flickering glow caught the scar that ran down the side of his face, a reminder of what he had lost. The woman reached out, almost without thinking, her hand hovering near the scar. But she stopped herself before she touched him. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly. "If they see you here, they'll think you came to finish what your people started." He gave a low, bitter laugh. "Your people burned my village before I ever took up arms. Maybe it's time someone remembered who struck first." The boy's head snapped up, startled by the anger in his voice. The woman's heart tightened. "Please," she said, Don't bring the past back here. Not now. He looked at her long and hard. You carry the past with you every time you look at that child. The boy shrank back, unsure what they meant. His mother reached for him, pulling him close, her voice trembling but steady. He's innocent. Whatever we were, whatever we did, it ended a long time ago. But they both knew that wasn't true. Some things never end. The Apache's gaze lingered on the boy. The firelight caught the carving in the child's hand, and for the first time, the man's expression softened. The small wooden figure, the eagle, was carved in the old Apache way. Only a few warriors still knew how to shape it like that. His chest tightened as realization struck him. The carving was his. He had made it long ago, before the raids, before the hatred. He remembered whittling it under the moonlight and giving it to her, saying it would protect her when he could not. And now, 12 years later, it rested in the hands of a boy who might be his son. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly. The boy looked up. "Mama said it was from my father." The Apache's breath caught. The desert went silent. For a long moment, all he could hear was the crackle of fire and the beat of his own heart. He turned toward the woman, and for the first time his voice trembled. "You told him that?" She nodded faintly. "I told him his father was brave." He stared at her, searching her face for lies, for resentment, for the bitterness that years of pain might have planted. But all he saw was truth, and a kind of sorrow he could never name. "I don't know what you want from me," she whispered. "He's safe here. He doesn't need to know the world that took so much from both of us." The Apache's eyes darkened. "He needs to know where he came from. He needs to know his blood." The boy looked between them again, his voice uncertain. "What blood?" The Apache crouched, his gaze level with the child's. "The blood that survives," he said. "The blood that remembers." The woman's hands trembled. "Don't fill his head with war," she pleaded. "He deserves peace." The Apache rose to his full height. "Peace doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from knowing who you are." The wind stirred again, lifting ashes from the dying fire, carrying them into the twilight. Somewhere in the darkness, a lone eagle cried. The sound echoed through the canyon, haunting and hollow, as if it called out for something lost long ago. The woman turned away, her shoulders shaking. The Apache stepped back toward his horse, torn between leaving and staying, between the call of his people and the pull of something deeper. The boy reached out suddenly. "Wait," he said. "Will you come back?" The Apache froze. He didn't answer right away. The question pierced through the years, through all the pain and pride that had built walls between them. He looked at the boy, his eyes, his face, the reflection of a life that might have been. "I will return when the truth no longer needs to hide," he said at last. Then he mounted his horse and turned toward the open desert. The woman stood silently, watching him disappear into the horizon, the fire flickering low behind her. The boy clutched the wooden eagle to his chest, his young heart stirred by something he couldn't yet understand. And as the last trace of the warrior vanished into the fading light, the desert swallowed the echo of his words, words that promised a reckoning yet to come. The night settled heavy over the desert, wrapping the small camp in a blanket of stillness. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the air smelled of smoke and dry sage. The woman sat close to the boy, her arms wrapped around him as he slept. His breathing was soft and steady, his small hand still gripping the carved eagle. She watched the stars flicker above and wondered how many times that same man had stared at those same stars, far from her, wondering if she was alive. Her thoughts drifted back to that long-ago night when everything had changed. The settlers had come west chasing land and freedom, but both came at a price. The land they claimed was not empty. It had a heart, a memory, and a people who called it sacred. She had known that even then, when she was still young and hopeful, believing that peace could exist if people only tried hard enough. She remembered the first time she saw the Apache warrior. He had come out of the canyon like a shadow, tall and silent, his presence commanding and calm. She had been frightened at first, but there was something in his eyes that stopped her from running. He was not like the stories they told in the settlement. He was proud, yes, but also curious, watching her as if she was part of the strange new world his people were being forced to face. Their paths crossed more than once in those days. Sometimes it was near the river when she went for water, other times near the ridge where the settlers built fences that cut through Apache hunting grounds. Words were scarce between them, but glances carried meaning, and silence spoke louder than voices. Then came the months when the fighting began. The army pushed deeper into Apache territory, and vengeance bred vengeance. She had begged her father to move east again, to leave before blood was spilled, but he would not hear of it. The land was too rich, he said, too full of promise. But that promise turned to fire one night when the Apache attacked the settlement. She had hidden in the storehouse, clutching a small blanket and the wooden carving the warrior had once given her. The flames had lit up the sky, and through the smoke she had seen him, his face marked with ash, his eyes full of pain. He had not come to kill her. He had come to take her away from it all. But fate had a way of twisting mercy into misunderstanding. The woman looked down at her son's sleeping face now, her heart aching. So much of the boy reminded her of him, the sharp look in his eyes when he was curious, the way he moved quietly as if listening to the land itself. She had tried to keep those traits hidden, tried to raise him as a settler's child, but the truth lived in him no matter how far she ran. The next morning, when the sun rose over the ridge, the boy woke to find his mother already packing their things. He rubbed his eyes and asked, "Are we leaving?" She nodded. "We have to go north for a while." "It's not safe to stay here," he frowned. "Because of that man?" Her hands paused on the rope she was tying. "He's not a bad man," she said carefully. "He's part of something bigger, something that started long before you were born." The boy looked puzzled, but she didn't explain further. Some truths were too sharp for a child to hold. As they started their journey, the desert stretched endlessly before them. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and dust, and every sound felt louder in the emptiness. The creak of the wagon, the caw of a distant crow, the rhythmic steps of the mule. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see a dark figure on horseback following far behind. And though she saw nothing, she felt it, the pull of something unfinished. Far across the canyon, the Apache warrior watched the horizon from his horse. The wind tugged at his long hair, and his hand rested on the hilt of his knife. He had not gone far after leaving her. Something in her voice, in the look she gave when she said the boy's name, had rooted him to that place. The truth she had hidden burned inside him like a coal that refused to die. He returned to his camp that evening, where the others sat around the fire. The younger warriors rose when he appeared, their eyes questioning. They had seen him ride out alone and return silent, his thoughts heavy as stone. One of them spoke. "You went near the white woman's camp." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared into the flames. "There is a child," he said finally, murmurs spread among them. "A child?" Another asked. "One of theirs?" He lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Maybe not entirely." The men exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard stories before, of love and betrayal between their people and the settlers. But such things brought only sorrow. An older warrior, his face marked by age and battle, leaned forward. "The world does not forgive mixing of blood," he said. "It brings confusion. You know this." The Apache's eyes darkened. "The world has taken enough from me. I will not let it take him too." The old man studied him carefully. "If the boy is truly yours, his life will never be simple. Neither the whites nor our people will claim him. You must decide what it is you seek." The Apache said nothing. He had no clear answer, only the haunting memory of the boy's face, the way he had clutched that carving, the carving that carried his own hand's mark. Back on the northern trail, the woman and her son reached the edge of a trading post by evening. The place was small, just a few cabins built around a well and a corral. The settlers who lived there greeted her with polite curiosity but kept their distance. She told them she was a widow traveling to find work, and they asked no more. In that land, every person carried a story they preferred not to tell. As night fell, the boy wandered outside the cabin, staring at the stars. He traced the outline of the eagle carving with his thumb and whispered to himself. He said he would come back. His mother stood by the doorway, watching him with a heaviness in her chest. She wanted to believe the man would never return, that the desert would keep its secrets buried. But deep down, she knew better. There was something unbreakable between them, something that no distance could erase. The next morning brought whispers of tension through the camp. Travelers spoke of soldiers moving through the nearby passes again, hunting Apache bands rumored to be gathering. The woman's heart tightened. She knew what that meant: more fighting, more blood. And if he was still out there, he would not stand aside. She tried to keep her son inside that day, but the boy was restless. His curiosity led him to the edge of the corral, where an old trapper was mending his gear. The man squinted at him. "You're not from around here, are you?" The boy shook his head. "We came from the south." The trapper studied him a moment longer. "You got the look of desert folk," he said slowly. "Not like most white children." The boy frowned, unsure what that meant. "My mama says I'm like her." The trapper nodded but kept staring, as if trying to read the truth written in the boy's features. Later, when the woman came to fetch her son, the trapper tipped his hat but spoke low. "Ma'am, if I were you, I'd keep that boy close. Folks around here don't take kindly to questions they can't answer." That night, as the moon rose pale over the trading post, the woman couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the shutters, and every sound outside made her heart jump. She thought she heard a horse once, faint in the distance. But when she peered through the window, there was nothing but open desert. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching. Far from the post, the Apache camp lay hidden among the red rocks. The warrior sat alone, sharpening his knife, the steel catching the moonlight. The old man approached him quietly. "You will go after them," he said, not as a question but as a truth already known. The Apache didn't look up. "He is my blood," the old man sighed. "Then know this, blood calls to blood, but it also draws danger." The soldiers move again. "If they find her, they will find you too." The Apache's hand stilled. "Let them come." The old man's voice was tired. "You will lose everything again." The Apache looked out toward the horizon, his eyes cold and distant. "I already have." The desert stretched silent between them, vast and merciless. Somewhere out there, a woman tried to protect a child from a truth that could destroy them, while a man rode through the night toward the only thing that still tied him to the world. And as dawn crept over the land, the first glint of sunlight touched the sand like fire, hinting that the calm before the next storm was coming to an end. The next few days passed under a restless sky. The desert wind shifted directions often, carrying whispers of change with every gust. The woman felt it in her bones, the uneasy silence before something broke loose. The trading post, once a quiet stop for travelers, had grown tense. Strangers came and went, their talk low and guarded. Some mentioned seeing Apache scouts in the canyons. Others spoke of soldiers riding out from Fort Stanton. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something to happen, though no one knew what it would be. The woman tried to keep her head down, working in the kitchen of the post to earn their keep. The boy helped where he could, fetching water, sweeping the yard, asking too many questions. But her mind was never still. Every face she saw, every sound from the hills made her heart beat faster. She knew he was out there, the Apache warrior who would not rest until he found the truth. At night, when the boy was asleep, she sat by the small window and watched the stars. Sometimes, she thought she saw movement beyond the ridge, a dark figure against the faint light of the moon. But when she blinked, it was gone. Still, she could feel him. That strange bond that time had not broken still tied them together, even now, when the world around them was turning sharp again. The boy began to ask more about his father. He remembered the man by the fire, the quiet strength in his voice, and the way his mother's hands had trembled when she spoke to him. One morning he asked directly, "Mama, why did you lie to him?" Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" "You said my father was gone." "But he's not. He came to find us." She turned from the stove, her face pale in the early light. "You don't understand," she said softly. "There are things I couldn't tell you before." "Things I still can't. Is he bad?" the boy asked, frowning. Her eyes filled with something he couldn't name. Sorrow, maybe, or fear. "No," she said. "He's not bad. But he belongs to a different world, one that doesn't forgive." The boy didn't press her, but his curiosity only deepened. That night, while his mother slept, he slipped outside and looked toward the dark line of hills in the distance. He felt something calling him there like a voice in the wind. Meanwhile, beyond those same hills, the Apache warrior sat with his small band near a dying fire. They had been watching the trading post for 3 nights, unseen by anyone. His men were restless. One of the younger warriors, his cousin, spoke sharply. "You risk everything for a woman who betrayed you. For a child who may not be yours." The Apache's eyes hardened. "You speak of things you do not know." "Then tell us," the cousin said. "Tell us why we hide here while the soldiers move through our land. You watch a white woman's cabin while our people starve." The Apache's hand tightened around his knife. "That woman saved my life once," he said quietly. "And the boy, he carries something of me. I cannot turn away." The cousin scoffed but fell silent under his gaze. The others shifted uneasily, torn between loyalty and fear. The Apache had always been their leader, fierce and unshakable. But now he seemed driven by something more personal, something that clouded judgment. The old warrior, who had followed him since youth, spoke softly. "There is a time for war and a time for truth. You must decide which one this is." The Apache looked toward the horizon, where the faint glow of the trading post flickered in the distance. "Maybe both," he said. That same night, a new presence arrived at the trading post. 2 riders wearing army coats, their horses dusty and tired. The soldiers brought news that put everyone on edge. The army had received word that an Apache band was seen nearby, and they planned to sweep the area. The captain warned everyone to stay alert and report anything suspicious. The woman listened from the doorway, her heart pounding. She knew who they were hunting. Later, when most had gone to bed, she found one of the soldiers sitting by the fire outside. He was young, with weary eyes and a scar across his cheek. She approached cautiously. "You think they're really close?" she asked. He looked up at her, surprised by the question. "Closer than you'd like," he said. "These raids don't stop easy. The chief they're after, they say he's clever, quiet. A man who moves like smoke. Some say he's more ghost than flesh." She looked away quickly, her hands tightening around her shawl. "And if you find him?" The soldier's expression hardened. "Orders are orders." The words sank into her chest like a stone. That night she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind, made her think of him out there, hunted like an animal. She didn't know whether to pray that he would come to her or that he would stay away forever. The next day the boy vanished for several hours. Panic gripped her until she found him by the river, sitting on a rock, looking across the water as if expecting someone. She scolded him, but when she saw his face, the anger melted. He held out a feather, dark, smooth, unmistakably from an eagle. "He was here," the boy said quietly. "He left this." She took the feather and stared at it, her voice trembling. "You don't understand what this means." He met her eyes, unafraid. "Then tell me." But she couldn't. Instead, she held him close and whispered, "Promise me you won't go near the hills again." He nodded, though she saw doubt flicker in his eyes. That evening, a storm rolled in from the south. The sky turned dark, and lightning tore through the clouds. The wind howled against the windows, and the smell of rain filled the air. As the storm raged, she thought she heard a horse outside, faint and distant. Her heart leapt, but she forced herself not to look. If it was him, he would not knock. He never did. Out in the storm, the Apache watched from a ridge above the post. Rain streaked down his face as he studied the faint lights below. He knew soldiers were inside. He had seen their horses, heard their laughter. But his eyes kept returning to one small window glowing with lamplight. Behind it, she was awake, just as he knew she would be. His old companion stepped up beside him. "You cannot go there now," the man warned. "You will bring death to her door." The Apache's gaze did not waver. "Death is already there," he said. "It follows me wherever I go." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face, grim, determined, torn between love and duty. The rain poured harder, washing away tracks but not the ache in his chest. Down below, the soldiers spoke quietly. They planned to move out at dawn, to search the canyons to the east. The woman overheard and felt her stomach twist. Dawn meant blood. She lay awake until the first gray light crept over the horizon. Her son stirred beside her, his small hand finding hers. "He's out there, isn't he?" he whispered. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, and the world won't let him be." As the soldiers saddled their horses and rode out, she stood at the doorway, watching the dust rise behind them. Part of her wanted to call out, to warn him somehow, but she knew any sound might betray his hiding place. All she could do was wait. By afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving the desert quiet again. The air smelled clean, but the silence carried an edge. The boy wandered near the edge of the post, and from the distance, a single eagle circled high above. He smiled, thinking it a sign, but in the hills, danger was closing in. The soldiers had found tracks, fresh, leading toward a canyon where the Apache band had been resting. The trap was forming, silent and certain. The warrior sensed it before he saw them. He motioned to his men, urging them deeper into the rocks. The younger ones looked to him for orders, fear flickering in their eyes. "We move west," he said. "We cannot fight here," but it was too late. Gunfire cracked through the stillness, and dust exploded around them. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the air filled with smoke. The Apache grabbed his bow and turned to cover his men, his mind flashing not to the battle but to the woman and the boy who waited beyond the hills. Back at the trading post, the woman heard the distant thunder of rifles echoing across the canyon. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The boy looked up at her, his eyes wide. "Is it him?" he asked. She didn't answer. She only stepped outside, staring toward the faint line of smoke rising in the distance. The sound of war had returned, and this time it was coming closer. The wind picked up again, carrying the smell of gunpowder through the valley. She clutched the eagle feather in her hand, whispering a silent plea to the empty sky. Somewhere out there, between the fire and the storm, two worlds were colliding again, and the fragile peace that held them apart was beginning to shatter. The sound of gunfire echoed through the canyon like thunder rolling across stone. Birds scattered from the cliffs, and the smell of smoke rose with the dust. From the trading post, the woman stood frozen at the doorway, her eyes locked on the dark plume twisting up into the sky. Every shot she heard felt like a strike against her heart. She knew he was there, caught between the soldiers and the wild land that had always been his home. Inside, the boy clutched the eagle carving against his chest, his small face pale. "Mama, is he going to die?" he whispered. She couldn't bring herself to answer. The truth lay heavy in her throat. She turned away, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. Her hands were trembling so hard she could barely stand. As the battle raged in the distance, the trading post came alive with fear. The settlers gathered their belongings, shouting orders, some talking about leaving before nightfall. The soldiers who had stayed behind loaded rifles and watched the hills. The air felt charged, heavy with dread and the coming of something that none of them could stop. The woman's mind raced. If the soldiers won, they would bring his body back, or worse, take the boy once they learned who he was. If the Apaches escaped, the army would blame everyone in the post for helping them. Either way, there was no safety left. She had spent years running from the past, but now it had found her, out in the canyon. The Apache warrior moved through the rocks like a shadow, firing and retreating, keeping his men alive as the soldiers pushed closer. The sun was high, burning through the smoke, and his body ached from hours of battle. But his mind stayed sharp. He had faced death before, but never with such weight pressing behind his ribs, the thought of the boy, of the woman, of what would become of them if he fell. "Go," he shouted to his men. "Split and move west." A young warrior hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll hold them," he said, loading another arrow. "Now move!" The men obeyed, vanishing into the maze of rocks. He stayed behind, crouched low, his bow steady as he drew. Each shot he loosed was calm and precise, keeping the soldiers at a distance, but there were too many of them, and they were closing in. When his quiver ran empty, he drew his knife. His breath came slow, and even as he pressed himself against the stone listening, voices echoed faintly, orders shouted, boots crunching gravel. Then came silence. That was always the worst part. Back at the trading post, the woman could wait no longer. She grabbed her shawl, wrapped it tight around her shoulders, and told her son to stay inside. "Don't move from this room," she said, her voice breaking. "No matter what happens. But, Mama, promise me," she said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Promise." He nodded, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. She kissed his forehead once, then turned and left before he could stop her. She rode out on one of the mules from the corral, her skirt whipping in the wind. The road was rough, scattered with rocks and dust, but she didn't care. The plume of smoke guided her like a dark beacon. Every mile she rode, the air grew thicker with the scent of gunpowder and fear. When she reached the edge of the canyon, she dismounted and crept forward, her heart pounding. The scene before her was chaos. Smoke curling from burned brush, soldiers shouting orders, the sound of hoofbeats echoing off the stone. She crouched behind a boulder, searching desperately for him. Then she saw him, across the ravine, crouched behind a fallen tree, bleeding from his arm. Relief flooded her for one fleeting moment, but it vanished as she saw the soldiers circling closer. There were too many. He couldn't hold them off much longer. Her mind spun, searching for a way, any way, to reach him. The river ran shallow through the canyon below, its water dark with silt. If she could make it across, maybe she could warn him of the soldiers flanking from the west. But before she could move, a voice behind her froze her in place. "Don't do it," said the young soldier with the scarred cheek. "You'll only make it worse." She turned slowly, her eyes wide. "You don't understand. They'll kill him." His jaw tightened. "He's already killed 3 of ours. You think they'll let him walk away?" "He's not your enemy," she said, her voice shaking. "He's a man trying to survive the world that's taken everything from him." The soldier looked at her for a long moment, torn between duty and something softer. Then he lowered his rifle slightly. "If you go, I didn't see you," he said quietly. "But you didn't hear that from me." She didn't thank him. She just ran. Sliding down the rocky slope, her boots slipping on loose stones, she reached the river's edge and waded across, the cold water biting into her skin. When she reached the far side, she ducked low, moving from boulder to boulder until she was close enough to see the whites of the soldier's eyes. The Apache was still there, crouched low, his breath heavy, his knife ready. She called his name softly. For a moment she thought he hadn't heard, but then his head turned slightly, his eyes finding hers. The look that passed between them said everything: shock, fear, and a fierce, wordless understanding. "What are you doing here?" He hissed. "I couldn't stay," she whispered. "They're coming from the west." "You have to go now," he shook his head. "If I move, they'll see you too." "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice breaking. "I won't lose you again." Before he could answer, a shot rang out. The bullet struck the rock near her, sending shards flying. She ducked instinctively, covering her head. He leapt from his cover, shouting something in Apache as he ran toward her. More shots followed, echoing through the canyon like thunderclaps. The woman crawled behind a fallen log, her heart hammering. She could see him, moving fast, firing back at the soldiers, his movements desperate but precise. The gunfire grew louder. Then one of the soldiers spotted her and raised his weapon. "Stop!" She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the chaos. The soldier's shot missed, striking the ground near her feet. Dust exploded upward. She stumbled, scrambling to her feet just as the Apache reached her. He grabbed her arm, pulling her behind cover. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice raw. "I had to," she gasped. "You can't fight them all." He looked toward the ridge, where smoke still rose and the sound of horses echoed. "They'll follow." "They always do?" He took her hand and led her toward a narrow gap between the rocks. It was barely wide enough for 2 people to pass through, hidden by brush and shadow. They moved quickly, slipping into the dark passage as bullets struck stone behind them. The path wound upward through the cliffs, steep and treacherous. The woman stumbled more than once, but he held her steady. When they finally reached a ledge overlooking the valley, they stopped to catch their breath. The soldiers were still below, their shouts echoing faintly through the canyon. She turned to him, her face pale. "You're hurt," she said, noticing the blood on his arm. "It's nothing," he said, binding it with a strip of cloth. His eyes were sharp, scanning the horizon. "They'll track us." "We can't stay here." She hesitated, then asked the question that had haunted her since the day he returned. What will happen if they find out about the boy? He looked at her, his face unreadable. They will take him from you, from me. They will make him choose a side when he belongs to both. Her breath caught. Then we have to protect him. His eyes softened for a moment, but then his gaze hardened again. You must leave. Take him and go north. There are places the soldiers don't reach. I'll draw them away. No, she said firmly. I won't let you die for us. He turned away, staring out at the endless desert stretching beyond the horizon. I've been dying since the day they took our land. This is the only thing that still matters. Down below, the soldiers had begun to climb, their voices growing louder. The woman could hear the clatter of metal, the barked commands, the distant thunder of horses. Time was running out. The Apache turned back to her. When they come, run to the river. Follow it until you see the cottonwoods. Stay in the water if you can. It hides your trail. She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. You're asking me to leave you. I'm asking you to live, he said quietly. For him, the sound of gunfire grew closer again. The woman looked toward the ridge, where the smoke had begun to thicken once more. The boy's face flashed in her mind, the way he held the eagle carving, the way his eyes lit up with hope when he spoke of the man he barely knew. She reached for his hand. Then promise me, she said. Promise you'll find us again. He didn't answer right away. Then he pressed the eagle feather into her palm, closing her fingers around it. When the wind carries the cry of the eagle, he said softly, you'll know I'm near. Before she could speak, a shout rang out from below. The soldiers had spotted them. The Apache turned, drawing his knife, his body tense. The woman backed toward the narrow trail that led downward, her heart in her throat. He looked at her one last time, his eyes burning with something fierce and unspoken. Then he stepped forward to face the soldiers, his shadow outlined against the bright desert sky. The woman turned and fled down the rocky path, the sound of gunfire chasing her through the canyon. Behind her, the echoes of battle rose and fell, each shot tearing at the fragile thread that still bound their lives together. The sun was sinking, the sky turning red, and the desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which heart would break first. The woman ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled beneath her. The canyon walls grew taller around her as she followed the path downward, the echo of gunfire fading behind her like a haunting memory. Dust stung her eyes and her throat, but she kept moving, clutching the small eagle feather in her hand as though it were her only anchor to the world. The river waited below, winding through the valley like a silver thread in the dying light. When she reached the bank, she fell to her knees, gasping for air. The sounds of battle had stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and cruel, pressing against her chest with a weight that made it hard to breathe. She turned back toward the cliffs, searching the ridges for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Only the smoke rising in thin trails, carried away by the wind. For a long time, she stayed there, her hands shaking, her heart caught between hope and despair. She wanted to believe he was still alive, that somehow he had escaped, that he would keep his promise and find her again. But the stillness of the canyon told another story. The woman dipped her hands into the cold river and washed the dust from her face, trying to steady herself. She couldn't stay there. The soldiers might come searching, and she had a promise of her own to keep. Her son was waiting. The thought of him gave her strength. She stood, tied the feather securely into her hair, and began walking north along the riverbank just as he had told her to. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep gold and red. The desert around her began to cool, the air sharp and quiet. With every step she remembered his voice, his face, the way his eyes softened when he spoke of the boy. He had carried so much loss and pain, yet beneath it all there was love, a love that had defied the hatred of two worlds that never wanted them together. That love had become her courage now, pushing her forward even as her body begged to stop. Back at the trading post, the boy waited by the window, his small face pale in the dim light. The others had long since left, fearing the soldiers' return, but he had stayed, just as his mother had told him. When he finally saw her figure in the distance, walking toward him beneath the crimson sky, he ran out to meet her. She dropped to her knees as he threw his arms around her, clinging to him as if she would never let go. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. "You're safe," she whispered, holding him close. "You're safe now." He looked up at her. "Where is he?" he asked softly. The question hung between them like a wound. She hesitated, unable to speak. The truth trembled on her lips, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. Instead, she took the feather from her hair and placed it in his small hand. "He's with the wind now," she said gently. "And the wind never truly leaves us." That night the sky was clear and filled with stars. The woman sat by the small fire behind the post, her son sleeping beside her, his hand still clutching the feather. The flames crackled softly, and the desert stretched endlessly around them. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind move through the dry grass. For a moment she thought she heard a distant cry, an eagle's call echoing faintly across the canyon. Her heart tightened. Maybe it was only her mind trying to find comfort. But she chose to believe it was him, watching from somewhere beyond the reach of this world. The days that followed were quiet but uncertain. The soldiers returned once, searching for the escaped Apache and questioning the settlers. She told them nothing, only that the fighting had moved east, and she had seen no one since. They left after a few days, convinced they had ended the threat. Still, the woman knew peace would not come easily. The land was restless, divided by anger and loss, and the scars of war ran deeper than the eye could see. She packed their things, deciding to leave the trading post behind. There was nothing left for her there but memories. The boy helped her gather what little they owned, a few blankets, a bag of dried food, and the small carving he treasured so much. As they loaded the mule, he asked quietly, "Where are we going, Mama?" She smiled faintly and looked toward the northern hills, where the land seemed softer, the sky wider. "Someplace new," she said. "Someplace where no one knows our story." Their journey was slow, but each mile felt like shedding another piece of sorrow. They traveled through dry plains and over rocky hills, sometimes sleeping under the open sky, sometimes finding shelter in abandoned cabins or with kind strangers. The woman worked where she could, mending clothes, helping with chores, always moving forward. She taught the boy to read the stars at night, to listen for the call of the wind, to understand that the world was both cruel and beautiful at once. And though she rarely spoke of the man who had saved them, his presence seemed to linger in everything. The sound of the river, the rustle of the trees, the strength in her son's eyes. One afternoon, months later, as they followed a narrow trail beside a ridge, the boy stopped suddenly. "Mama, look!" he said, pointing toward the sky. Above them, high and bright against the sun, an eagle circled, its wings wide and sure. The woman shielded her eyes, watching it glide gracefully over the valley. The sight stole her breath. She felt something stir deep inside her chest, something warm and painful all at once. The eagle let out a sharp, clear cry that echoed across the open land. For a moment she couldn't move. Then she smiled softly. "He found us," she whispered. The boy looked up at her, puzzled. "Who did?" She brushed her hand over his hair. "Someone who loved you before you even knew his name." The boy smiled, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of her words. Together they watched as the eagle vanished into the light, its shadow slipping across the ground before fading into the distance. As the years passed, the boy grew strong and tall, with the same calm eyes as the father he had barely known. They built a small home near a quiet stream surrounded by cottonwoods. The land was kind to them there. The woman planted a small garden and traded what she could in the nearby town, never drawing attention to her past. Yet sometimes when the wind moved through the trees in a certain way, she would pause and listen, her heart remembering. She never remarried. Some loves are not meant to be replaced. They simply live on in different forms. When the boy was old enough to understand, she finally told him the truth, the story of his father, the Apache who had saved her, loved her, and fought to protect them. She spoke of his courage, his honor, and his belief that peace was worth fighting for even when the world refused to see it. The boy listened quietly, his eyes bright with pride. "I wish I could have met him," he said softly. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "You will," she said. Every time the wind carries the eagle's cry, he's with you. That night, as she sat by the fire once more, the sky deep and filled with stars, she closed her eyes and felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed her. It had become something softer, something that reminded her of how deeply she had lived and loved. The desert, once a place of loss, now felt like home, a vast, endless reminder that even the harshest places could hold beauty if one only learned to see it. The wind picked up, moving gently through the cottonwoods. She thought again of his words, of the promise he had made before he faced the soldiers. When the wind carries the cry of the eagle, you'll know I'm near. And as the fire flickered, she heard it again. The distant call carried on the breeze, wild and free. She looked up at the stars and whispered, I know. Then she smiled, her heart full, knowing that love like theirs never truly ended. It simply changed shape and kept moving, carried forever by the wind.